This is the Bookwaves, Artwaves Hour. Interviews with writers on KPFA's nationally syndicated Bookwaves program, along with interviews about film and theater and archive book interviews that stretch back 4 decades. I'm your host, Richard Wolinsky. Today we go back to the Probabilities archive for an interview with Pulp magazine writer E. Hoffman Price, who died in 1988 at the age of 89. Ed Price was a feisty raconteur who is best known as a friend and collaborator of the great horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. While I was present during the interview, most of it was conducted by my late co-hosts Richard A. Lupoff and Lawrence Davidson. The interview aired once in a truncated form and hasn't aired since. Most of the interview concerns events that took place nearly a century ago, making it look into a world, literary and otherwise, that does not exist anymore and hasn't for a long time. Then we hear a brief interview recorded 2 years ago at BAM PFA with award-winning experimental filmmaker Rob Nilsson. A documentary about Rob Nilsson's life and his work, The Way Things Seem to Be, will have its world premiere on Sunday, March 29th at noon at the Christopher Smith San Rafael Film Center. The film's director, Zan Petrov, along with Rob Nilsson, will be introducing the film. Today's show concludes with a review of Stephen Sondheim and John Weidman's musical Assassins at Oakland Theater Project through April 5th. As usual, you can find updated live theater and bookstore links and listings by clicking on the link at the top of today's Bookwaves Artwaves page at kpfa.org. E. Hoffman Price, who was born in 1898 and died shortly before his 90th birthday in 1988, wrote fantasy and science fiction stories for the Pulp magazines, along with some non-fiction and fiction for other magazines. Mostly forgotten today, though several of his stories are available in small press editions, his claim to fame is a single collaboration with the great horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. It was titled Through the Gates of the Silver Key and is a sequel to Lovecraft's story, The Silver Key. A contributor to Weird Tales, Price was also friends with 2 other writers from the magazine, Seabury Quinn and Clark Ashton Smith, as well as with the longtime editor of Weird Tales, Farnsworth Wright. He also knew Otis Adelbert Kline, famous in his day for writing imitations of Edgar Rice Burroughs stories. The Probabilities radio show first went on the air on KPFA in 1977. Within a year, my co-host Lawrence Davidson was on the trail for old pulp writers and editors, egged on by science fiction and fantasy author Richard A. Lupoff, who officially joined the show a couple of years later. This particular interview was conducted at Price's house in Redwood City, California, most likely in the spring of 1979. The memoir he discusses several times, Book of the Dead, Friends of Yesteryear, Fictioneers, and Others, was eventually published posthumously in 2001. The interview opens with a question by Richard A. Lupoff.
There's one incident that I believe you are either involved in yourself or have knowledge of that has always fascinated me, and I've never been able to pin down the real details. Okay, the background was, as you'll recall, Weird Tales.
Yes.
Started in 23, Henneberger and Ed Beck.
That's correct.
Okay. And they also started a magazine called Detective Tales.
Could it possibly be Real Detective? Would you give me the name of the editor and then Baird? Edwin Baird. Edwin Baird did become editor of Real Detective, I think. They purported to be a true fact crime magazine. However, they ran a lead novelette of fiction. I finally, in the early months of 1933, I was busting my ass to get into the crime story writing. It required better writing than weird and then the fantasy or science. but you didn't have to know your ass from a hole in the ground. I mean, regarding to the actual facts about law enforcement, and the fantasy and the science fiction writer also didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, and also could not write, and the rates were so low that the minute a man learned to write, he got out into a field where he could make a living. So here it was. I was pretty happy when I began selling cover-featured crime novelettes. I sold Edwin Baird. I'll be cover-featured. I sure by God was an affidavit. It had to be notarized. I not only had to make a sworn statement that this fiction novelette was true, but I will also hold Edmund Baird and everybody involved safe and harmless against any lawsuits for libel or whatsoever, cause that didn't cost me $1 to a notary public to commit perjury to get my $125.
Tell a little bit about Baird as a person. Did you deal with him fast?
I never met Baird face to face. My first detective story was such a dull pain. My friend Farnsworth Wright read it. He said, look, don't let Edwin Baird see that. That's a frightfully dull thing, and someday you might write one not as bad, but this one would prejudice him against you, perhaps. Well, one day I did write one which was not as dull by any goddamn means, and I did sell him, but that was the only time. Once was enough.
I'd like to back up. Since you brought Farnsworth Wright into the story, there's one particular incident that I hope you'll have some information about. About a year after Henneberger and Baird started Weird Tales, the magazine was not doing well. They went through some sort of financial crisis and separated. Baird went away to do detective work.
Yes.
There was a brief hiatus, and then Weird Tales came back with this giant anniversary issue.
Yes.
Which involved all sorts of people. Harry Houdini and H.P. Lovecraft. Otis Kline was somehow involved. Wright, of course. Were you involved in that?
No. I got an acceptance in about the middle of March of 1924 to the Raja's Gift. Now, that did not appear on the newsstands till December 1st of 1924. That is the January 1st, 1925 issue. I forget when I got my check. My hair wasn't quite as white, though, but it took a long time to get that check. Then I sold them The Stranger from Kurdistan that same month for their new low rate of 1/2 cent a word. The cooker from 1 cent. You see why I was not so goddamn dedicated as a fantasy writer or as a science fiction writer. I wrote only because I was too much of a blundering clown and couldn't write well enough to make a good magazine. Many another could say it if he was candid and outspoken and such a competent judge of writing as I have become.
Could you give us a little personality sketch of any of these people? Henneberger, Kline, Wright, because you knew all of those.
I never met Henneberger. I never met Baird. And I would respectfully suggest, if I started giving sketches, you'd be wasting your time, wasting my time. Why not wait until my agent sells that 440-page typescript entitled Friends of Yesteryear? He's had it about 2 years. I never lived to see it in print.
You worked for some of the more offbeat magazines. I have in mind the Spices and Terror and Horror story.
The Terror and Horror, I must correct slightly. That bloody crap was even, really, not in the sense in Arthur Leo Zygot. He was a big name in it. He was a specialist of that kind. I wrote fantasy, but never what you would call a horror story. I don't say I wouldn't have, but there was stuff that I preferred writing. The straight fantasy, and I told you why I got out of that as quickly as I could.
Well, what about the Spices?
Oh, the Spices. The Spices made groceries. I used to send a story out on a Saturday. Rural delivery, mail service. The following Saturday, I'd go to the box and pick out a check. And one day, there was no check. The second week, no check for that story. Well, I waxed exceeding wroth. They can screw themselves and each other if they please, but I will not. Write to their goddamn present participle magazine. Never. They can't insult me this way. So I wrote for other people. Until one day, what do you suppose I found on my desk? The manuscript, I never mailed it.
Now, when you were working for them, you did not use the name E. Hoffman.
Oh, sure I did.
You did?
Well, when I had a couple of stories, I was Hamlin Daily. Occasionally, I have one here now with both names in one issue, which sustains the statement. But the Spicy was one of the most useful things, and I'll tell you why. It was pure for shit, I grant, but it was a good market, and it was an opportunity to learn how to write. One spicy adventure came I'd always wanted, since I was a beardless boy of about, 12. I was going to be an adventure story writer, like Captain J. Cutcliffe Hine, Adams of Empire, H. Bedford Jones, J. Allen Dunn. So I had in the carding grade E. Hoffman Price. It wasn't until 10 years later that I wrote 2 stories, sent him, and sold both. However, I did not resign from Union Carbide. Okay, I didn't sell another thing, mind you, for many a month. But I digressed a bit. I was learning, I researched every spicy adventure as though I were slanting it at Adventure Magazine or at short stories. I busted my ass to do a good, honest, sincere, well-researched thing for a bunch of who wouldn't know the difference anyhow, but I would know the difference. You remember that young gentleman who was running a porno movie in New Orleans, one of the New Orleans science fiction crowd? I can't think of their names. He was running this porno show.
And that was the Spicy.
Yes. However, I introduced Simon Bolivar Grimes when Spicy Westerns came out. I researched Westerns. Man, I researched the bejesus. Now, the only inauthenticity that I ever permitted was that whenever Simon was riding across the Maricopa or other desolate deserts, I have crossed those deserts goddamn many a time, but I have never yet seen a clear pool of water and a nude girl bathing. But Grimes always found them. That was the one bit of fakery where you had to know how to write. I busted my ass for a good how many years before I crashed Adventure Magazine. And it was tough crashing short stories, complete stories, and top-notch. Robert Howard and I, he was ahead of me by a year or so. We crashed them both in the same order. Complete stories, top-notch, then Argosy. If he hadn't blown his brains out, he too would be a great and famous writer. I mean, a good writer. He's great and famous. Quote me on that, right?
I just want to know how you got to write a story with H.P. Lovecraft, Through the Gates of the Silver.
Oh, well, that'll do you a lot, too. That's the one bad thing. The minute they discuss Lovecraft, they all get ecstatic, become sincere artists, pompous, pretentious. Nobody can ever see Lovecraft as a man of whimsy, sparkle, humor, a very human person. Well, so here we were. I was like a cat walking on eggs when I went to meet him that day in New Orleans. I had heard all the horror stories about his being a goddamn bloody blue-nosed Puritan. I'd seen an awful picture of him. He looked like a cross between Dracula and a ghost. The lower part of the eye, that's got a very spectral expression. His eyes never did look that way. Or have you seen that picture?
I'm not sure which one you mean.
Well, it is one that shows an abnormal amount of white, or gives it a peculiar spectral stare. That's a libel. It should never have been published. So, before I walked more than a block from the Lafayette Hotel, right near the Lafayette Square and the old post office in New Orleans, on St. Charles Avenue, we were walking into the Vieux Carré. Before we got to the rim of the Vieux Carré, I found Lovecraft as one of the most congenial characters and that his bookish way of talking, if he had spoken any other way, it would have been a forced and unnatural effort. I quickly got accustomed to his stately 18th century diction. We got along fine. I had always liked the Silver Key, so I could very sincerely compliment HPL on that story, and though I had reread it many a time, I like it. I still like it. One thing led to another. I suggested that he and I team up and follow Randolph Carter in his adventures going through the gates of the Silver Key, and I proposed having him return and tell us about her. This was all for fun. So, this was in June that we sat up there about 28 hours, having more goddamn fun than you could. People don't see Lovecraft as a man of fun, whimsy, and sparkle.
You're listening to an interview with the late Pulp magazine short story writer E. Hoffman Price, recorded for KPFA's Probabilities radio show in early 1979. My co-hosts for the interview were Richard A. Lupoff and Lawrence Davidson. I'm Richard Wolinsky on the Bookwaves, Artwaves Hour.
You've all heard of the famous Necronomicon. Well, now my conversational Arabic at Salim Hesney's restaurant in the Vieux Carré of New Orleans, not Damascus, had set me kind of pondering. Dr. Taylor's 2-volume work on An Introduction to the Study of Arabic also set me thinking. Abdul-Hazred, I said, damn it. The Necronomicon about, this was straight, mind you. I had fallen for all the whole on of their mind. So I was telling, always the soul of tact, Lovecraft was a guest. And a really learned man, and I didn't want to be a goddamn ignoramus. So I was picking my way cautiously. So I said, now, that Necronomicon, I said, there's something about this title, the author, rather, Abdul-Hazred. Now, I said, I grant that Professor Taylor does take cognizance of the quadrilateral Arabic root, and doubtless you're familiar with a well-known monograph by Dr. Bernard Stade on quadrilateral Amharic roots, a cognate language, if you don't mind my calling it your attention, a cognate language of Arabic, although some would call it Ge'ez rather than Amharic. With such a scholarly character, I had to hold my own notion. Well, what I said, this is what has me baffled. Ordinarily, the triliteral root is almost universal. Dr. Taylor explains, has an interesting doctrine on how come the quadrilateral root, but this thing, Abdul, servant of, there's a definite article which by should be tithed over the succeeding word. Now here we have Hazred, we have a redundant definite article, and we also have 4 consonants, and I noticed he was getting more and more kind of sitting forward in his chairs, and I noticed a peculiar glint in the eye. I said, no, he isn't offended, but there's something odd about his expression. So I said, I am not questioning your authenticity, your honesty, or your competence at Arabic, but frankly, I would like to have you explain that quadrilateral root. Then he busts laughing right out loud and admits it's a whole goddamn hoax that he cooked up the title, the name, Abdul-Hazred, when he was about 6 years old, writing a boy's version of The Thousand Nights and One Night, and he thought that was one of the best things that had happened in a long lifetime. He really enjoyed that, the bewilderment of the readers and how many of them took it seriously. There is an example of Lovecraft here. So now we get back to your question. The collaboration. We were drinking coffee, not rum and wine. As you know, he was quite a teetotaler. And we were going to do all kinds of things. We created, instead of the split byline, as a best just get a, say like Etienne Marmaduke de Marigny, who will write 1 million words a day, getting $1 a word, and we'll have a tremendous studio. We all agreed on it, with an ice cream plant, 2,000 different flavors. There were no wine cellars and no quarters for concubines, and no garages for Italian sports cars either. This was kind of tailored out of respect to Lovecraft's whimsies. I would say the ice cream business is a short way of ruining your digestion. There should be more liquor and more concubines, but always deferring to the whimsies of a guest. That was just how the thing built up. So I sent him a 6,000-word first draft. He scrapped all but about 50 of those words, and wrote 13,950 other words that were remotely related to what I had written. Farnsworth Wright rejected the thing, which distressed Lovecraft. 1933, when I was the guest of Otis Kline in Chicago, I went to pay my respects to Farnsworth Wright. Mrs. Wright began needling him about Farnsworth. Why don't you buy that story? You know you like it. And he said, my dear, of course I like it. But with the financial situation as it is, and it's a 14,000-worder, then he said, well, what do you think of it? I said, sir, I have something at stake there. Count me out. As I hold judgment. You're the editing of the magazine, I'm not. Well, they haggled back and forth. I wouldn't participate. To cut it short, he did accept the thing, published it. The magazine lasted many a year thereafter, and, I finally got the check. $140. I'd heard a lot of stuff about Lovecraft getting a preferred rate. I have never heard any actual evidence of it. And Lovecraft hated very much to discuss the crass financial details of any deal. He just didn't know what to say about. Well, the way it went, I knew that most of these sons of bitches always shortchanged and robbed him unscrupulous. They were a bunch of half-ass bastards who could no more write than I could fly. So they got him to rewrite them bodily. He would charge them a nominal sum for a revisory collaboration, rebuild the thing, and they would always settle for that 10% or something.
Infamous or famous Lovecraft revisions.
Yes. Well, I said to him, here's $140. I transcribed. I had to read 14,000 of your jeweled words and put them into typing. I'll take $35 and you take the remainder. I said, I'm getting a reasonable reward for the... I had the fun of planning it with you, and you were using at least 50 of my words. So for the first time in history, Lovecraft was not robbed blind. He loved maps, as you may know. Well, when I wrote the Surveyor General of Egypt to send me the whole smear of 1,000-to-1 scale street guides of Cairo, filling stations, every fire hydrant, they're quite useful for writing realistic spy stories of Cairo. And if conned that dark land, that was always a good line, writing of Egyptian magic. I got to be quite adept at Egyptian magic, writing about it. So then I got the 5,000-to-1 sheets, the 15,000-to-1 sheet. Then I got some of the Necropolis at Thebes. I got one in Latin, an old one, for HPL. And the other one, well, I said, what the hell, dog, give him bottom. And then, in our correspondence, we decided we should organize a necropolitan police force. Drunken, bawdy mummies, the more lewd fellows, annoying female mummies as they're prowling around by moonlight in the necropolis. I ended by sending him a couple of tickets to the annual Metropolitan Police Ball. This is Lovecraft on the hoof. There was whimsy, delightful character to life. And that's why I get so goddamn fed up with these long-faced solemn cats. Some of them are delightful persons as individuals, but they want the significance of everything that Lovecraft... It had no goddamn significance, a lot of it. It was just the fun of the moment.
What about Seabury Quinn?
Oh, delightful, delightful. Seabury was one of the greatest. Not literally, but emotionally speaking, my ass was drying in the dust. In 1933, I was in New York. I had sold every blasted crime story in my inventory. I bought a car, headed for New York to meet the editors. If you could ever hear of a hardware dealer or a grocery dealer who sells out his whole damn inventory, picks up his profits instead of replenishing his inventory, you would kind of figure that you locked son of a bitch up. Well, nobody locked me up. So I landed in New York, and the inevitable happened, what with back freezes and nobody paying off. I should have been in New Orleans, building up an inventory. When he was in that mood, well, Seabury Quinn was one of those magnetic presences. He invited me to dinner at the house. We had a delightful visit. Somehow, my prospects had not improved one goddamn bit, but I walked away feeling how optimistic, like the conquering lion. I had a number of advantages. I had a number of adventures and handicaps, setbacks, before I even became a conquering kitten at Judah. But it's the first step toward being the conquering lion of Judah. Seabury Quinn bucked up the mole without ever endeavoring to do so. He was too tactful to ever suggest, "Sir, your morale needs a bucking." Oh, no. We corresponded with each other for many a year. Quinn and I met 35 years later in Boston. We corresponded right to the end.
Since Lawrence and Richard's audience are largely people who are interested in science fiction, you could tell a little bit about how Satan's on Saturn came about.
Oh, that. Incidentally, whether you know it or not, I have actually sold small, odd lots here and there of science fiction. It's been the most subsidiary, only 10% of my entire output has been fantasy. And science fiction, one might have been 10% of that 10%.
Do you have a running count at how much fiction you have written?
All about 5 million words. Roughly. A newspaper man in Palo Alto some years before I bailed out estimated at that. He had to say, of course, that Shakespeare had written no more than 5 million. And I said, well, now, could have changed. I don't know whether I'd done much better. Now, a science fiction. The thinkings on or of Saturn, Otis Adelbert Kline was more and more inclined to get out of the fiction business because he was selling all his stuff hardcover and magazine, but he was not a sufficiently fast producer, and the word weights were not compatible with the style in which his family had over the years, from their earliest days, become accustomed to. So he became an agent. He liked, however, to have a hand in fiction. As a matter of sentiment and fun, he always liked to write. So he sent me a synopsis. A Kline synopsis was usually stimulating simply because it was something entirely different. I could say, well, no, that's a lot of horse. This is the way it should be done. That gave you just that takeoff, and I could back the stuff off like that. And I had never attempted a thing of that sort. Naturally, no science fiction had a goddamn bit of science in it. If it ever had, the readers would be completely baffled, as many of my schoolmates have been. When they see px squared equals y, they damn near have a hemorrhage. So we wrote to him. Kline's synopsis. He might have had an opening chapter. The most amusing thing about it is, well, you have the story of how come it was sold. That's in the foreword of Far Lands, isn't it?
I don't recall this. This was the serial in Argosy.
Yes, that was the story behind the story, which I've always said, Lorena set the pace there, and that's by far a mile the best piece of reading in the book. In fact, about the only piece of stuff that is interesting to read. Some innocent bystanders protested. I said, for once in one of those very rare occasions she happens to be right. These stories in this book are composed between 1926 and 1950. And it's a stupid son of a bitch indeed who can't learn a little something about writing in 25 years.
Okay, here you are with Price. He has sent you this synopsis.
And maybe a chart. So I sat down and wrote it.
You're listening to an interview with the late Pulp magazine short story writer E. Hoffman Price, recorded for KPFA's Probabilities radio show in early 1979. My co-hosts for the interview were Richard A. Lupoff and Lawrence Davidson. I'm Richard Wolinsky on the Bookwaves, Artwaves Hour.
He was a sort of shadow Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Now here is the best story I do. I do not know the fact. The story is that Edgar Rice Burroughs had a somatic breakdown where Frank Munsey was concerned. Now that I don't know. I can't authenticate it. I can't refute it. So the story goes. So Munsey, presumably, this is inferentially, didn't want to meet the latest blackmailing demand from Burroughs or his agent, so he set Kline to work, hence the pyramids. Whether they were imitations, when it seems that Burroughs no longer wrote for Argosy. I believe that's an ascertainable fact, isn't it? Kline appeared, and Burroughs did not. Burroughs, at one time, appeared in Argosy.
Oh, yes, Burroughs had a lot of material.
Well, then he ceased there. The only reason he'd cease is because they weren't meeting his price. What other reason? Satans on Saturn were a combination of the worst of Kline and the worst of Fights. Master salesman though he was, he could not fight a customer with that dog of dogs. Argosy was one of the first rejectors. There went our chance of $750 or $900, whatever our rate then was, for a 60,000 worder. Several years elapsed. Finally, reaching the end of the trail, Otis offered the script to Leo Margulies, chief of the Throwing Publications chain. Take it for $250, Otis urged. Leo shook his head. I would not publish this goddamn blob if you paid me $250. Months passed. There was a new editor at Argosy's desk. Kline hustled to Wolfenland and to hand him Clayton's on Saturn. In due course, the editor phoned Kline. They met in the editorial rooms. By now, the newcomer had heard all about Kline's persuasive salesmanship, forceful and hypnotic at times. $750, he said grimly, and now a cent more. Take it or shove it up your arse. Kline kept a sweet face until they got into the elevator. He ran to the back.
Well, that's safe to say.
Robert E. Howard, you knew him.
Oh, yeah.
What was he like?
You will find a good many pages in my forthcoming book. I don't know where it's going to forthcome.
I want to see it because I have read the preliminary chunks of it that have been appearing hither and yon for the past many years.
Now, the late W. Paul Cook ran some of the stuff in The Ghost back in 1948.
You wrote for the magazine Adventure.
Oh, yes.
And I was wondering what your dealings with Arthur Sullivan Hoffman were.
I had none with him. Kenneth S. White was the editor in my time. And I will also add gratuitously, I'm not even sure that I could have made it in his time. I might or I might not. When Popular Publications, Rogers Terrell, editorial director, editor-in-chief, and finally publisher, I think, a hell of a good character. To say that I knew him well would be a little too strong, but I knew him reasonably well. I think that these magazines all deteriorated and were degraded to the low standard. Now, I sold Black Mask, but never when Jack Shaw. Christ almighty, they never let me pass the office boy. But when Rogers Tully bought Black Mask, I began selling it. Now, how much Argosy, what the hell, I don't know. Oh, no, I sold Argosy before Terrell bought it. That leads to one of the weirdest goddamn things, but that's digressing. You're getting the inside here, mister.
Did you ever have any dealings with Hugo Gernsback?
Was that son of a bitch? No, not the rates he paid.
Then you certainly never had any dealings with Sidney Gernsback. He was Hugo's brother, and my understanding is that he's the one who didn't send the checks for the story that Hugo bought.
Every time I see someone being awarded a Hugo, I see this isn't Edgar Emerson, the biggest fraud, swindler, pure strain chicken, prick and scoundrel ever in the business, and the only editor I've ever known or known of who so fully deserved these understatements of mine.
I know that Lovecraft referred to him as Hugo the Rat.
That's what I said, but he was the gentleman.
Oh, I wanted to ask you a question, a bit of bibliography. On one occasion, you mentioned a novel of yours that had been published some years ago.
Yes.
Could you give us the info on that? I've never been able to come across it.
Well, I had a paperback published late in 1951, The Case of the Cancelled Redhead. I am about to mail that to my agent for offering in England and Europe. I reread the thing, and I still rather like it. A bit of whimsy, crime stuff, honest John, getting interested in philatelic pursuits. You got to have an occasional murder to break the monotony.
Who published that in the U.S.?
Falcon. Wasn't that the first step in Robert Howard's leap to fame many years later?
His books, such as they were, he had a collection of westerns published in England before his death, way, way back. His first American book, as far as I know, was the Arkham House Skullface. Then he had the Gnome Press Conan books.
But when he became wealthy, many years after his death, you couldn't give the goddamn stuff away. Falcon or some paperback.
Lancer.
Lancer. Lancer is the word. Strike it from Falcon is my mistake. Lancer. Lancer went broke trying to promote Howard, and all of a sudden there was a boom.
Lancer was not the publisher of The Case of the Cancelled Redhead.
Oh, no, it was Falcon.
It was Falcon.
Yes, definitely.
That company seems to have disappeared without trace. Lancer, some of the debris of Lancer floated back to the surface.
Yes, and that's what made Howard famous. Yes. It took years of plugging to get Lovecraft or Howard into their present fame many years after their deaths.
I was curious as to how the Depression hit the writers for the Pulp magazines.
In those days, if a man couldn't make a living writing, there was a boom in the pulp world which began a little while before I got to do it in 1932. Whenever 2 or 3 people got a skinful of illegal liquor, they would launch a magazine. There was Dime Detective. Then there was a competing Nickel Detective. I don't know how that contest worked out. If you couldn't make a living writing then, some of the bits you never could. It was far easier then than it is now. Today there are no markets. If you had a good agent, now I loaded up spy stories. I sold spy stories until they folded. And just about the time they folded, or a little thereafter, Writer's Digest, or one of those things, author and journalist, announced the new market. Well, I think you begin to see the merits of having an agent. And there was always something happening. The rates weren't high, but there was plenty of business. I sent my then wife, Quinn, in a pattern as long as a horror's dream, and I had it carefully checked for a young lady who knew nothing about the mechanics of driving. I put in a whole set of front and rear wheel bearings just so that I noticed that some were slightly scored. If I were driving myself, when the young lady took off, I had about $10 or $12 in the checking account. Well, I sold 45 stories in 47 weeks. Well, Simon Bolivar Grimes, the first Grimes story, paid $50. The final Grimes story was a 20,000 word, which made $500. The Spiceys paid. In fact, the Spiceys raised my rate to 2.5 cents, and Adventure magazine, to meet the competition, had to raise their rates to 2.5 cents.
You were out in California. You lived in California for what, the past 20 years or so?
I've lived in California for more than 44 years.
So that means you probably didn't have that much personal contact with the editors of, say, like Harry Bates at Clayton magazine.
Why, the truth of it is, that's why I have an agent. I can't bring around with contacts. An agent is a salesman. He reviews contracts. And anyone that draws up his own contract, instead of having an agent do it, is nuts and fruit. I have had a few very pleasant contacts with editors, but I don't consider it essential.
Larry and Dick did an interview with Charles Hornick, who edited Wonder Stories. He went up to Clark Ashton Smith's house. Yeah. Did you ever go there?
I met Smith in 1934, the first writer I met on the Pacific Coast. In fact, I was up there twice. I met his parents. I corresponded with him back in 1928, 29.
We were talking to Stanton Coblentz, and he had met Smith a few times in Northern California, and he said that his impression of Smith was that he was somewhat of a shy guy.
Oh, I can see how one might get that impression. But I think that was rather superficial. I got a touch of that, and then I also noted that veiled irony, a touch of something. He had seen quite a bit. He had seen through most of it, and it was largely ridiculous. His writings, the Avronia series, you see, Lovecraft and Howard lived what I call two-dimensional lives. They lived such insulated lives that neither could ever be what I'd call a good writer. A good scholarly historian, something like that. But elsewhere, they were in the world, but as you probably know, Howard's mother kept him carefully insulated. Lovecraft was self-insulated. Now Howard, instead of saying, "Horse shit, Mama," and joining the Marines, he stuck around home. So it wasn't his environment, he was wired up that way. So with Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith was tri-dimensional. Read the Avronia stories. About Moriamus, the rather immoral enchantress. And read some of those other yarns. Lovecraft is quite incapable of writing them, and apparently Howard also. He could rubber stamp things, but Smith could write about people.
E. Hoffman Price's memoir, Book of the Dead, Friends of Yesteryear, Fictioneers and Others, was eventually published in 2001. You've been listening to a Probabilities archive interview with Pulp magazine writer E. Hoffman Price, recorded in early 1979 at his home in Redwood City, California. My co-hosts for the interview were Richard A. Lupoff and Lawrence Davidson. I'm Richard Wolinsky on the Bookwaves, Artwaves Hour. We'll be right back. Rob Nilsson is a Bay Area-based maverick filmmaker, the winner of the Camera d'Or at Cannes in 1979 for Northern Lights and the Grand Prize at Sundance for Heat and Sunlight in 1988. He continues to make independently distributed films. A documentary about the life and work of Rob Nilsson, titled The Way Things Seem to Be, introduced by Rob Nilsson and the documentary's director, Jean Petrov, gets its world premiere at the Christopher Smith San Rafael Film Center this coming Sunday, March 29th at noon. And for more information, you can go to cafilm.org. This interview was part of a larger interview about the life and work of filmmaker Dave Schickley and was recorded at BAM PFA. You have a long and very distinguished career, Rob Nilsson, in the world of independent, very independent films. I was looking at the resume, and it's quite long.
Northern Lights was 79. Camera d'Or at Cannes was the award that we won.
Following that, you played the lead and was the director of films Heat and Sunlight.
Heat and Sunlight. Heat and Sunlight was the one that won at Sundance in 1988.
Did that ever get any commercial release?
A little bit, not a lot. I'm making a film every year, and so in order to stop and become a distributor is sometimes a little inconvenient. So you think, well, the system should work. You know, here we won these awards and stuff. Well, the system does what it wants to do. And I only do what I want to do. So I elected to be making. So now I've done about 46 feature films. And I recently had an offer from a big company to do them all. And when I looked at the contract, I said, thank you very much. I think I'll roll my own if you don't mind. And so that's what I'm doing this year and for the next few years to get all this stuff out there.
Can you talk about the series of films you did about the homeless?
I worked in the San Francisco Tenderloin for about 12 years. working with workshops of people who showed up, all comers, free workshops, in what I call direct action, which is a way of preparing people for an improvisational style of dramatic cinema. And so we made 9 at night, 9 films that start at 9 p.m., about 40 to 50 different characters on the edges of society. Read The Tenderloin. That was one of the great 10 years of my life, with all the people I met and all the people I still know. And I did the same thing around the world, in places like Japan and South Africa and Italy, and about 7 or 8 places, with a workshop idea like that, where you take real people and you just assume that that's what cinema is supposed to be about. Why do we need all of the accoutrement of actors and 20 trucks and 15 unions? Why don't we get down in the street? And David was one of the progenitors of that idea, along with Cassavetes. And I got to meet John Cassavetes, and all the more became convinced that the cinema's all around us, right here. This is a cinema scene. We don't have a camera, but it can be made out of whole cloth almost anywhere you are, and that's been my idea. The idea is to break it down into scenes and to build from those outlines backstory improvisations with your players. So it isn't just that they come and then be themselves. No, it's a much more involved system than that, but it's based on them. It's if you want to call it that, it's all whatever the term is. I mean, I don't try to find somebody that's going to be like that.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm going to find people that are like this right now, and I can see, and we can all see together as a workshop. We fashion it together with all the interactions that we have through the emotional exercises that we go through, and then eventually the story becomes apparent to us. And now we have to do backstory improvs with cameras, so that when we start the film, we're just doing the same thing we were doing before. And it's all one of the major things about it too is to overcome fear. Yeah, pretty soon people the camera means nothing to them. They can even go like that a little bit, because maybe they know that they like the 3/4 better than a straight up. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit because that's not what they're thinking about. But
so it would be kind of, say, if I took the recording, the raw recording, not what airs edited, of us,
mm-hmm.
and then you said, do it again, and then maybe a third time, and then you write out a script, and then you look at each of the players and begin to talk about backstory?
No, I don't write any scripts. I mean, I don't write scripts for people. I write a script for myself, and to some extent for me to understand what it's all about. But mostly we work from an outline that comes, if there was a screenplay, we'll put that over here. Now we have the outline, so we know basically what the character's doing in what order. And then once you have that, then let's start before the story. Let's see what it was like when you first met Billy. In a bar, it was like whatever it is, you create a circumstances, or you go to a bar and you shoot it in a bar. If it happened in a street, you go to a street. With that, then you start to get the idea of who you are, not by talking about it, but by doing it. When you're working down with everybody's coming for free and nobody gets paid, including me, you've got the freedom not to have to work for the money, because there isn't any money. There's only interest and passion and the reality of lives as we live them.
A lot of these ideas go back to Cassavetes. What are a couple of Cassavetes films that people could see that show this kind of principle in action?
Yeah, well, the first one would be Shadows, which he made in New York City,
okay.
69, I think it was, and he was on the radio and said, "Hey, we're making a movie, and if you want, come down to blankety blank," and he had a workshop and made that film. And then Faces is, I would say, those two are the most pure. Woman Under the Influence is another. That was the last interesting film he made. He made 9, and John and I both agreed that his first 5 were where he was really finding it, and later on it was less interesting.
Well, much like Cassavetes, in order to live and finance yourself, you also did commercial direction and acting a little bit.
Very little. I did. Yeah, I was on my Miami Vice and Beverly Hills 90120 was it? Yeah, I mean, these were silly little things that my friend Bobby Roth, the director, he'd get me in. David too. He'd have David and I give us roles, so made a little money. But no, I did do one. I did Thomas Turned to Dust, which was a Rod Serling script that I got to adapt to film for
USA Network.
There you go. Yeah, no, you're ahead of me. I can't even remember half of the things I've done, but thank you very much for that. But no, I tried to stay away from it because it dulls the instrument. You're working for a different reason. If I paint a picture, I loved Caravaggio, say, but I'm not trying to be Caravaggio. I'm trying to be as intensely myself as he was himself. And that's what I think an artist does, and what I tried to do in cinema, with a little help from my friends, to be honest, because you can't make a film by yourself.
Oh, Rob Nilsson, you also did a documentary on Trotsky called "What Happened Here?"
Yes, I did. We were early on in a film collective here called Cine Manifest, and it was designed to do films about working people. So we got involved in reading, and I was not too aware of the radical history of the U.S., but I got interested in Trotsky years ago, and I've read everything that I could ever find about him as a person with this deep sense of responsibility to life. And he grew up on a farm, and he would weep by the way his father treated his serfs, and spent his whole life trying to see if there couldn't be a socialist reality that would work. And of course, he ended up being assassinated, and by the very people, one of the very people that he was associated with, trying to create this ideal society.
For all of those films, one a year for so many years, if people are listening and they want to see them, is there any way for them to see them, or are they available, say, on DVD that people could send for?
As I was saying before, I'm creating now a system for myself, for everybody involved too, whereby you're going to be able to see, hopefully by the end of a year from now, a couple of years, all of them will be on a particular website that I'm now raising money to try to create. And anybody out there who wants to, consider it, you can talk to.
Can you give a website or email address?
Sure. R. Nilsson, NILSSON, at robnilsson.com. Love to hear from people who are interested, because that's where we're going now. After all these years, we're going to roll our own, as I said, and then make it possible for anyone to see them, most particularly the ones that were in it.
Do you have people watch what's going on, or is it just very private among the actors or performers, whatever you want to call them?
In our workshops, which we did once a week for 12 years, I never allowed anyone to come in except one time, and it was a reporter, and it was a disaster. And why? I don't know. I never had one where someone didn't do something so remarkable, so perfectly human that you couldn't believe it. And this was the one time, but I only took him on because I kind of knew him vaguely, and I would never do it again. It's so personal and private, and people standing around, you get distracted. And what I want is total concentration, but total relaxation at the same time, and that's difficult with people standing around gawking.
You've been listening to an interview with independent filmmaker Rob Nilsson, recorded at Pacific Film Archive 2 years ago while discussing the films of David Schickley. A documentary about Rob Nilsson, The Way Things Seem to Be, gets its world premiere this Sunday, March 29th at noon at the Christopher Smith San Rafael Film Center. For more information, you can go to cafilm.org. I'm Richard Wolinsky on the Bookwaves, Artwaves Hour. Coming up now, the weekly Bookwaves, Artwaves Theater Review. When Stephen Sondheim and John Weidman's Assassins first opened in 1990, The show focused on the relationship between America's gun culture and the need to be seen. Looking at presidential assassins and would-be assassins, we see desperate people finding all kinds of excuses to rationalize their actions. Today, mass shooters don't care about being seen, but Assassins still speaks to us in different ways, as is evident in the production now at Oakland Theater Project through April 5th. As Oakland Theater Project's executive artistic director Michael Socrates Moran says, Assassins was always a work of experimental theater, so why not experiment further and turn a show, which usually features 8 actors, into a one-person tour de force, signifying modern-day loneliness and desperation. He notes that we've all become separated from the community experience, constantly checking our phones, watching films at home, shopping without going to a shop. These solo experiences breed the same disconnection that gave rise to these would-be and actual assassins. In addition, there's a line in the show about returning America to what it was, which resonates deeply with Trump's entire movement. Assassins takes place in an imaginary early 20th century fair midway. Each assassin is there, taking us from John Wilkes Booth past the Reagan and Ford would-be killers, and then back to Lee Harvey Oswald. In this production, that all rests on the shoulders of Adam Cuvée Neiman, who plays all the assassins and all the minor characters. He sings all the chorus songs and the duets, switching back and forth, and he's phenomenal. The operative mood of this country, as performed here, though, isn't loneliness, it's anger, an anger that explodes in the songs, emphasizing the atonality of the music, which matches the madness and despair of the characters, and it turns Assassins into something very contemporary. Where this Assassins is less successful is during the scenes between the songs. Some work well enough, others, with overlapping dialogue, stop the show dead in its tracks, as do the long pauses that give the actor time to breathe and regroup. But when Assassins does work, which is most of the time, the results are revelatory, and why ultimately this Assassins is unforgettable. Assassins plays at Flax Art and Design through April 5th. For more information, you can go to oaklandtheaterproject.org. I'm Richard Wolinsky on Bay Area Theater for KPFA. Until next week, I'm Richard Wolinsky on the Bookwaves, Artwaves Hour.
Things are heavy right now, so here's a pause. Be kind. Be kind to strangers. Be kind to neighbors. Be kind to yourself. Staying informed matters. So does staying human. This is KPFA, listeners supported, community powered.
Our 77th birthday celebrations begin with Sabroso, a benefit dance event for KPFA, on Friday, March 27th from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. at La Peña Cultural Center, 3105 Shattuck Avenue in Berkeley. Hosted and emceed by Con Sabor's Luis Medina, with 2 live music sets by Julio Bravo y Sal Sabor, DJ El de la Clave, a dance performance by Rueda con Ritmo, and a salsa dance lesson by Felipe Martinez. More information at kpfa.org/events.
For 75 years, KPFA has presented progressive voices who spoke truth to power. Odetta.
Odetta, you were one of the first women I ever saw wearing an afro. I first saw it on a dancer by the name of Jenny Lagon in Los Angeles. And when she did programs of African lore, she would have her hair in natural. And I remember running into her at City College in Los Angeles. And she was getting ready to do a program, and she had that natural. I said, "Hey, Jenny," and I was talking to her, but I couldn't keep my eyes away from her hair.
94.1 FM. 75 years of building community trust. Support us today at kpfa.org.
You're listening to 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online worldwide at kpfa.org.